Water Management Plan public information event. So this will be the first public information event for the Bowness Surface Water Management Plan. There'll likely be a further one later on in the year. As the presentation states, I would be grateful if everybody can keep themselves on mute until the question and answer session near the end, just to minimise the background noise for the presenters. Please also note that this event is being recorded and will be posted on the Falkirk Council website for anybody that does miss it this evening. So a little bit of content for this evening. So the running order will be a quick round of introductions, with further introductions from the AECOM team during their presentation. A little bit of background on the Surface Water Management Plan itself and its purpose. We'll then go into the AECOM presentation, and then we will look at the question and answer session. So the question and answer session will be a simple either use the hand up option in the Teams, or you can pose your question in the chat function as well. Obviously this is obviously a virtual public information event, so we are aware that there possibly will be technical issues. So if there is anything, please write in the chat and we can try and sort that. So on introductions, my name's Gary McGregor. I'm the Roads, Bridges and Flooding Coordinator at Falkirk Council. I'm assisted this evening by Lee Martin, who is our Senior Flooding Officer within the Council. And we also have a team from AECOM who are our Flooding Term Commission and have been since 2018. So a bit of background on this Surface Water Management Plan. So Falkirk Council looked at a strategic surface water management plan was developed through AECOM, our term commission, under our obligations, the council's obligations from the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009. So the strategic surface water management plan fulfilled our actions from the SEPA National Flood Risk Management Strategies, a surface water management plan. Bowness was chosen for the pilot study. As most of you will be aware, Bowness is a coastal town located approximately 7 miles east of Falkirk. The town is protected from coastal flooding by Bowness Flood Protection Scheme with direct defences. It is, however, impacted by surface water flooding, as are many other areas over the Falkirk Council boundary, with problems predominantly coming from runoff of agricultural land as well as surcharging drainage systems. So the purpose of this evening's event is to inform members of the public, local members and any other relevant stakeholders on the current phase of the Bowness Surface Water Management Plan, and just make people aware of what it is. This will hopefully help us identify long-term sustainable and achievable mitigation measures which can be implemented to manage the surface water risk to Bowness. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll pass you over to AECOM to carry out their presentation.
That's great, thanks Gary. So I'll just let Ben share our presentation. So yeah, like Gary's already given a good introduction, but I'll just introduce the AECOM project team. So my name's Hannah and I'm project manager for the project. With me today I've got Ben, who's our main engineer on the project, and Aisling, who's our technical lead. Okay, I'll hand over to you to start the presentation.
Hi there. So I thought I'd start by giving a little bit of the study background. Gary's already covered quite a wee bit of it, but start by saying why are we here. So SEPA produced a National Flood Risk Assessment, which investigated all sources of flooding as well as any likely impact of climate change. This assessment identified that Bowness was potentially at risk of surface water flooding and that further investigation was required. So as Gary said, Falkirk Council have commissioned AECOM to undertake surface water management plan in Bowness, and that the main purpose of this event is really just to gather any local information from yourselves, bring you up to date with the work we've carried out so far, and give an introduction to potential options that we might consider to mitigate against surface water flood risk in Bowness. So when most people think about flooding, they tend to think about water courses bursting banks, but obviously this is a surface water study, so I thought I'd give a quick overview of what defines surface water flooding. So the two images at the top there demonstrate flooding as a result of rainfall runoff flowing or ponding over the ground. This is a direct result of urbanisation, so you can see that figure there. There's in a natural landscape you'd have rainfall infiltrating into the soil, running into watercourses and evapotranspiration off of vegetation back into the atmosphere. However, when we get to urbanized, developed land, there's a lot less opportunity for all of these things to happen, and that results in more runoff, which can impact properties. I should note, though, that it is now a requirement for all new development to not increase flood risk. So new developments going forward shouldn't have as big an impact here. Surface water flooding can also be defined as flooding from sewers and other artificial drainage systems. So this would happen when the network capacity is exceeded, either due to a higher than usual rainfall event, or when sewer systems affected by high river or sea levels backing up into the network. And that you can see examples of these in the images in the bottom there. And similarly, flooding from small urban watercourses are culverted through towns, and that's a similar mechanism to the sewer system. When these culverts become overwhelmed, they can overtop and cause surface water flooding. I also thought I'd give you a quick introduction to what the process behind the surface water management plan. So the main aim is to reduce the risk of surface water flooding in the most sustainable way, and it's required under the Flood Risk Management Act. As you can see in that image on the right there, it's an iterative process. So we start by developing a plan, and then we implement and monitor the success of this plan, and then reviews and any updates to the plan. And this section tends to happen if there's any significant changes in catchment or new legislation is published. At present, we're in the develop plan stage, and the next slide here gives an overview of the process we've undertaken to date and where we are at the moment. So the first stage of the study involved gathering data like flood history in and around Bo'ness, topographic surveys of watercourses, and CCTV surveys of culverts. We also gathered a computer model of the sewer network in Bo'ness, amongst other things. This helped us to go on to stage 2 and develop an understanding of the catchment, the different mechanisms that can impact flooding in and around Bo'ness, so whether that's rainfall or sewer exceeding of capacity. And we then developed a hydrology and input this into a hydraulic model, computer model, and ran the model to produce flood maps. From these flood maps, we then moved on to stage 3, which is where we are at present. These flood maps helped us to identify hotspots or critical areas in and around Bo'ness that are at particular risk of flooding, and come up with a long list of options to mitigate against that flood risk. These options will then be appraised on an economic, social, and environmental basis, and that would bring us on to stage 4, where we will produce a final report, and out of that appraisal process, we will recommend any future flood risk management options. This slide just gives a brief overview of some of the locations we know that flood in Bo'ness from the flood history investigation we've done. So in February 2016, flooding was noted at properties on Glenview, and as you can see in that image in the top right there, sandbags were deployed to intercept the flow paths. So flooding here was a mixture of overland flow from the agricultural land to the south, flowing onto the road and then towards these properties. Additionally, we have the August 2019 and 2020 flood events, quite extensive flooding observed, not just in Bo'ness, but across the wider Falkirk area from a short spell of intense rainfall. And that image on the bottom right there shows Blair Avenue in August 2020. And you can see quite significant flood depths there, approaching the threshold level to some of these properties. We've also noted that there's frequent resident reports of flooding at Corby Hall Road. So once we'd gathered all our information in stage 1, we then moved on to our hydraulic model. So we've used the latest computer modelling techniques to estimate the likelihood and the extent of flooding in Bo'ness from multiple sources. So these sources include the 2 main watercourses, the Dean Burn, which, can you see my cursor on the screen there?
Yeah, yes. We can, Ben.
Yeah, okay. So the Dean Burn, which is in the west of Bo'ness, and also the Grahamsdyke culvert, which runs from the golf course in the south down Gauze Road and travels east and eventually discharges just east of the Drum development. flooding from the sewer network has also been represented, as well as ponding rainfall and overland flow, which is unable to be managed by the existing drainage systems. This is particularly important considering the influence, as we've already discussed, of field runoff from the south of Bo'ness. The hydraulic model has also considered the sea level influence on the sewer network from the Forth estuary. So we estimated the flood flows that can be expected in the rivers and in the drainage network, and we based this on rainfall data and the characteristics of the catchment of Bo'ness. We then applied all this information to the computer model, and it contained the river channels as well as structures like bridges over the channels and the culverted watercourses, the sewer network, and also the floodplain, so the general topography of Bo'ness, allowing us to see which areas would be at risk. And this gives us a best estimate of flood extent, depth, and velocity throughout the study area. So as a result of running these through the model, we were able to produce flood maps, and this helped us to identify hotspots. And identifying hotspots allowed us a risk-based approach to prioritise where investment is going to achieve the most benefit in and around Bo'ness. So this map here on the right-hand side shows the hotspots that we identified, and they're color-coded based on the flood mechanism at play in each hotspot. So the pink hotspots are predominantly flooding is caused by surface water, overland flows, or the sewer network becoming exceeded. The light blue in the west is from the small watercourse overtopping. The yellow hotspot is predominantly from overland flow paths from the fields to the south, and the dark blue hotspot is a kind of a combination of all the ones that I've just mentioned there. So my next two slides are going to be some of our flood maps that we've produced, and I thought I'd just give a little bit of a terminology check to people who maybe aren't familiar with the term of a return period. So essentially a return period is a probability measured as a fraction, and it's a term that's used to describe a flood size. It's a means of describing how likely a flood is to occur in any given year. And the example I've used here is a 1 in 100 year flood event would be a flood that has a 1% chance of happening or being exceeded in any given year. So this flood map here shows the 1 in 30 year return period flood event that we've modelled in Bo'ness. We chose this event as it generally marks the design return period for surface water networks. However, you can get flooding below this as it's a combined issue with the capacity of the network and with overland flows. As you can see from the map, there's quite widespread flooding across Bo'ness, and the critical areas we identified include but aren't limited to Blair Avenue, which is here on the map, Drum Acre, which is here underneath where it says Academy, Carden in the northeast, Corby Hall, Linlithgow, the areas at the south of Linlithgow Road, on the west and east of the road, and at Dawson Place. The flood maps also showed significant flooding in the Drum development. However, we believe this is an overestimation given the lack of drainage details for the phased new development. And as I discussed earlier, new developments there's a requirement not to make flood risk worse. So it's agreed that when the phase development has been completed, we will collate the drainage data from the various developers, update the model, and gain a better understanding of the flood risk in this area. This flood map here shows the 1 in 200 year event, so a more critical event of higher magnitude. As you can see, the critical areas are largely the same throughout Bo'ness, although the depths and extents are greater. And what we found from our modelling was that flooding across Bo'ness was largely caused by surface water and surface water network capacity exceedance, although there were two areas where we noted this wasn't the case. So where I'm circling now is the Kinneil Railway, and the flood mechanism here is the Dean Burn overtopping and inundating the railway, as I'd said previously, and then also the houses in and around Drum Acre, a combination of the sewer exceeding capacity here, overland flows, and also the Gramesdyke culvert becoming overwhelmed and spilling into the playing fields and then towards the properties. So once we'd modelled, once we'd run the model in Bowness and produced the flood maps and understood the mechanisms at play in each hotspot, we then developed a long list of mitigation options, and my colleague Aisling is about to go through some of these options.
Hi everyone. So yeah, as Ben said, I'm Aisling. I'm the technical lead on the project, and I'm just going to chat through briefly some of the options that we'll be considering. As Ben said, now that we understand the sources, the pathways, what's affected by flooding, we're then able to start brainstorming some options of how we can try and reduce the impact of flooding. So these are kind of engineered examples. So on the top left here is kind of your most common thing you would probably think of when you think of trying to defend yourself against flood risk. It's a flood embankment or a flood wall, which is essentially just a barrier where you're trying to force, in the case of surface water management, we'd likely be trying to force water onto areas such as playing fields, parkland, etc. So we're basically creating a barrier to force flood water to stay away from people's houses, essentially. So we'll be looking at these as a few options. Another kind of key option with surface water is also looking at pipe upsizing. So this is where we know now that our sewer networks and things were designed well before the level of flows that they're taking now with increased development, urbanisation, climate change, etc. They were not designed for the level of flows that they have to manage now. So we look for pinch points in the networks where potentially we could upsize the pipes and allow more flow capacity in there to keep the water within the system. So that's another option we'll be exploring in a number of locations where there's issues with overland flows overwhelming the network capacities. And very similar to this, then we look at underground storage, which is just a plastic attenuation tank shown on the top right here, is kind of an OTT version of pipe upsizing, in that we may not be able to store all the excess flow in a pipe. We might need to capture this all in a large area underground, and then we can store and release this flow at a controlled rate so that, again, we are not overwhelming the drainage network. So that's another option. And also the good thing about these options are obviously that they're underground, they're out of sight, out of mind, but also we have other challenges associated with them, which we'll have to look at in terms of working around existing buildings, existing infrastructure. That's where those kind of challenges are introduced there. Another few of the options that we're looking at are more kind of above ground types. So the option on the bottom left here is an example of a river which was formerly culverted, i.e. humans have put it in a tunnel years ago and we've wanted to build stuff over the top of it. And it then creates issues with flows traveling too fast, whereas if we can open up these concrete culverts and things, you can reintroduce bends into the river that slows flows and reduces your risk of flooding. It also kind of reconnects the floodplain, so you've got more natural flood storage, again, particularly in areas of parkland, so possibly around the Drumacre Graham's Dyke culvert. We're looking at this kind of option to reduce overland flows impacting properties downstream by utilising the green space there a bit better. Another two options that we'll be looking at are quite similar. A flood storage area is essentially where you put a flow control onto a drainage link so that you're basically you're limiting the amount of flow that can pass forward, and then using that to back up flows behind that structure that you can store water. So you would typically do that in parkland as well. Again, basically trying to force water to flood in areas that are less likely to cause disruption and damage to people and can recover more easily. And a detention basin is similar, but the main difference there is you're basically either capturing overland flows in a kind of landscape depression, as you can see in the image there, or conveying that flow via traditional pipe work, and that area would be dry except when there's a rainfall event, so that area can still be used out with storm events. And finally, the other key option here would be property level protection. And this is where we haven't been able to stop the flood or reduce the flood at the source or reduce the pathway of the flood. But what we can do is add reduce the pathway into properties by adding things like, that's an image of a flood door, which is essentially a waterproof door, so that would prevent any water ingress into a property. We've also got things like flood barriers that you can deploy where there's a longer time frame that you know that a flood's coming, so you can put your flood barriers up. They're not there normally, but they're stopping the water from getting into your house, and that's reducing your disruption damage, and it means people are able to recover a lot more easily after a flood. So just onto the next slide there, Ben, please. And some other options we're considering are more kind of nature-based solutions. So the key ones really that will be a lot of what we're looking at for Bo'ness will be something called a swale up in the top left corner here, which is essentially a grass channel where we would use this to capture overland flows. So the benefit of this is it's kind of moving away from, you know, you've got a traditional road drain that's one point where you can collect flow and then it goes into a pipe, whereas with a swale you're keeping the water above ground so that you're able to replicate those processes that Ben mentioned earlier in terms of evapotranspiration, losing water to that, losing water to plant processes, losing water that's infiltrating into the ground rather than conveying it away as quickly as possible. And it also means that you're introducing a whole length along which you can capture flow rather than a point. So they can be more efficient at managing overland flows. And the other option then, bioretention, is a similar idea. But the main difference here is that you would typically do these where space is at a premium. So again, you're trying to utilize those natural features, but with bioretention, you would use an underground fill that creates space between the different rocks so that you can store more water that way. That's kind of the key difference. And finally, some natural flood management examples are also what we're looking at in the kind of upper catchment. As Ben mentioned, there seems to be a reasonable amount of runoff coming from the agricultural land upstream. So we're looking at ways to potentially manage that a bit better by slowing those flows with things like if we could create wetlands potentially upstream to store some of that water in the soil, things like making sure that we're managing that land properly in terms of introducing planting to store more water and trees and understory planting, and also things like ploughing fields in the right direction so that we're not creating big channels for flow to go rushing down over a hill, that we're trying to slow that as much as possible and make that a more awkward, for lack of a better term, route for flow to get towards people and property. So that's kind of a very quick overview of the options that we're looking at the minute. Just onto the next slide then, Ben, please. So in terms of where we are now, the options I've just chatted through are our long list essentially. So we're basically going to look at all those options and develop a short list, and the short list options will be what we look at in more detail in terms of developing those and testing those in our hydraulic model to size them and understand what their potential impact on flood risk could be. So we will get from that long list to the short list partially from some feedback from yourselves. We'll also do things like looking at the feasibility of those options in a bit more detail. For example, could it be constructed? Can we get access on there to construct it? Is it going to cost an exorbitant amount? Is there something, for example, are we going to impact any habitats or anything? So those kind of screenings is what we'll be doing to get to our short list. And then once we've got those shortlisted options, we're then going to appraise those based on their economic, environmental and social benefits. And that's to make sure really that we're not just purely focused on cost benefit, that we're prioritising the best options for Bo'ness based on their overall benefits and what they can give to the community. Not just, obviously the key objective is to reduce flood risk, but where we can also potentially introduce amenity space, things like that, we would obviously assess those and prioritise those benefits as well. And from that then, we will then have our preferred options that we will present in a report, as Ben mentioned, and that will also result in a future public consultation where we will discuss those preferred options and how we got to that stage through that appraisal process so that everybody can come along and see that story of how we got there. Yeah, I'll just hand back to Hannah then.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, Aisling and Ben. That's everything from us just now. I'll hand you back to Gary at Falkirk Council.
Thanks very much, Hannah, Ben and Aisling, on your presentation there. So what we'll do now is we'll basically just go into a question and answer session. So as the presentation shows, we can use the chat function in the Teams, or you can use the raise hand function on Teams as well. So I'm really happy to open the floor to any questions or pieces of information that anybody has on the presentation or anything to do with Bowness Surface Water Management Plan. Hi, Brian.
Hi there. At the beginning, Gary, you said that the sewer pipelines need to be updated. I think you said that they were substandard. Am I saying that right?
Possibly Ben said, yeah. I think there'll be some areas that I think Ben and Aisling would have said that some of the sewers and the drainage systems aren't able to cope with the rainfall that is nowadays, especially with climate change. Yeah.
Today we had a downpour rain for about a couple of hours. The road down at Bridgeness and Bridgeness Lane was you couldn't get through it. It was over the road, and there was a council member there as well. Told my daughter, who stays there, that it was the water board's problem. We phoned the water board and they disagreed, really, said it was the council's problem. Also come up past the Bowness Hospital, and the old gate there was flooded. It was flooded at Richmond at the crossroads, but the drains didn't, how could I say, that there used to be cleaned very near every week. I've never seen the drains getting cleaned, because that's half the bother as well, for the surface water and water getting taken away. In Bowness, is there a problem with this, or is that going to be inadequate to help the floods?
So in terms of the gullies and the surface drainage system, Brian, that would be our roads maintenance team. And it's something that we would look at through the detailed options, was that what maintenance would be required, and if there is a maintenance regime needs set up for these gullies. I think the council has obviously reduced resources, and I think, like you're saying, there's possibly been changes to the drainage system and the regime that's ongoing currently. So in terms of our detailed design and looking at this, we would have to obviously work in alongside our roads maintenance team to make sure if these gullies are required to be cleaned, they are cleaned on a specific regime.
Yeah, I noticed too, since the drum was built, and the new section of the drum that's getting built now, there seems to be more flooding down the Bridgeness area than what it used to be. I don't know if the team realises this or has sort of surveyed this or not.
I think that's going back to, sorry, just the point like Ben made, that because that development's obviously getting built at the minute, we're kind of trying to get to a point that we can collate all the different developers' information, that we can then have a look at that and see if it's anything to do with that, or if it's just, our rainfall's getting worse, all these different things. There's also obviously different issues across Bowness based on the topography that are probably coming together. It's trying to figure out if it's that specific issue or if it's a few different things. But we will get those drainage details from those developments and put them in, so we can test that when we get to a pause point in that development, that we can do that.
No. Okay.
There was also flooding across the road down at Grangemouth Road, just top of Weatherspoon Drive as you're coming from Grangemouth, and then you turn to go along a bottom road to Bowness. There was a lot of water there this afternoon when I came back at 3:30.
Okay.
Before you get to Snab Lane.
Okay.
Thanks, Madeline. We'll have a look at that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
something, you know, we're more than happy to take all these pieces of information on board and have a look at the design for these areas. So, you know, some of them, like Brian's saying, it might be due to the regime or lack of roads maintenance side in terms of clearing the gullies. So we can certainly look at these specific areas. So it's good to certainly hear any of these issues that you certainly are having. Yvonne McBlain has wrote in the chat as well. So she's messaged to say that we live in Caradon and have also had trouble reporting imminent flooding of our property during high rainfall. We've also been passed from pillar to post and been unable to get assistance. Also, the whole sewer on Caradon Bray is blocked and has been for years despite repeated reporting. So probably in terms of your first question, Yvonne, my next slide on the kind of concluding statements has got a couple of email addresses that could assist you. So first and foremost, it's got our flooding email address at Falkirk Council, and then it's got other certain pieces of information like the flood forum, SEPA, the floodline. So I'll look at that next. And then second, your Caradon Bray culvert being blocked. We'll certainly have a look at that. Is there any? I don't know if you could provide any further information on specific areas that you're aware of that.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me. I can't seem to get my camera to work. This is
Hi,
Yvonne.
Hi.
We've lived at Caradon for more than, oh, there we are. Should be able to see me now as well.
Hi.
We've lived here for years, and almost all of the actual drains, or the gundies as we call them here in Bowness, have been blocked on Caradon Bray for years. That's not to say necessarily that all of the sewer is blocked, but our impression is that there can't be a very good sort of flow of water down there. And we've also noticed that as the number of houses increases up at the drum, then the intensity of and the amount of water that we get down here at Caradon has also increased.
Perfect. No, thanks very much for that, Yvonne. We'll certainly look at the first and foremost the Caradon culvert being blocked. You know, we depending on the issue that we have with culverts and specific assets like that is that, you know, the council as a whole doesn't own all of it. So some specific areas under private ownership are the responsibility of the riparian owner. So we would look to issue them with a letter notifying them of their responsibilities. And then if we didn't get on an answer, obviously we have got certain powers to go in and clear that if that is the case. And in terms of the reporting, I think, like I said, you know, there'll be email addresses and contact numbers on the next slide for you to have a look at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Brian?
Yes. You spoke about Dawson Place. I've been up here 40 odd years, and the field at the back of us did have a rubble drain to help the flow coming from the field at the back here. It's between Blair, I think it's Blair Avenue and Dawson Place. And I think one time said that the council is not responsible for that rubble drain. To me, the rubble drain, the drain is at the manhole for the drain is just up the back of me, and the rubble drain goes right along, which is really, it's clogged up. Did the team take anything consideration into that surface water coming? I mean, when it rains, it's like a torrent coming down the pathway, you know, and there's new houses got to get built along Crawfield. There are 500 houses or so. Is that going to affect it down this area as well? I know it affects between Blair Avenue and Pine Green, coming across, and there's a big ditch right down there, which is supposed to be a kind of walkway or that, and nobody's done anything about it.
So probably just to your first point, Brian, of the rubble drain that you discussed there. So that really depends on where that rubble drain sits. So if it does sit in private land, it would be the private landowner's responsibility. I'm happy for you to provide us with further detail on that, you know, via email or something to show us that exact location, and we can look at it. And if it is ours, you know, we can look at getting that cleaned out. You know, we're obviously looking at a longer term plan here for the full bonus as a whole, but we're also want to look at quick wins. You know, we want to help the area as much as we can. So if there is areas that we can carry out quick wins, you know, we can carry out CCTV culverts, CCTV surveys of culverts and check specific locations that are perhaps defective. We're more than open to do that. In terms of your question on the new developments, so I think Ben or Aisling had mentioned earlier, so all new developments come through our flood team within the council, and they then draft a flood risk assessment of that. So all new developments, you know, they won't be passed unless they can show that the sufficient drainage is in place and it doesn't affect any other areas downstream.
Okay, thank you.
And just as a general point, that a lot of the flooding in and around that area you're talking about results from initially overland flow from the, or our modelling showing it's resulting from overland flow from the agricultural fields in the south, and a lot of our options have looked at trying to slow that overland flow to aid the flooding there. So yeah, it's something we're looking at.
Yeah, I think essentially it's almost the options we're looking at there are essentially enhancing that kind of rubble drain that you're talking about there, doing that and designing it so that it's future proofed and able to deal with probably larger events than maybe it's currently designed for. And as part of that as well, there'll be a maintenance regime and everything done as part of the design of that as well to make sure that that stays operational over its design life. And if that is an option that's taken forward, that would then be adopted by the council for that maintenance to continue. But yeah, essentially probably just enhancing what was there presently.
There's also problems on Gauze Road due to the new Miller homes. Water just pours down from probably part of the golf course drain. It's been, I don't know, but it comes right down along Boriston Road and right down past where the doctor's is. Doctor's surgery can glass, and recently that washed away a whole load of the road, and there was burst pipes, and the road was half the size for about 3 months because the water board weren't very swift in acting, and great lumps of road were washed away and pavements and everything.
When was that?
Well, that was just probably February.
Okay. Oh, so yeah, the very, very bad rainfall, yeah. Okay, no, that's really useful to be aware of. And again, we can discuss with Scottish Water as well. They're responsible for surface water as well, so we can look into that a bit more and investigate where exactly or what exactly the root cause of that happening is.
Thanks, Madeline. Brian, sorry, is your hand up again? Or is it still up for previous, or is it another question?
No, it's not.
All right, no worries. Thank you. Any further questions or pieces of information or concerns or anything really? Perfect. So I'll move on to the next slide. So as I kind of touched on to Yvonne there earlier, our concluding statements. So we will have another public information event, likely to be August or September, depending on these options in a report. Please don't hold us to it if it is October. So possibly later on in this year, we'll look at options and we'll look at the full detail of what is possibly required in Bowness. Like I said earlier, we're willing to help as much as we can in terms of flooding, as we do throughout the Falkirk Council area. We are a small team, however, you know, if you do have any instances of flooding, there's a contact centre number there. We do have a standby resource down at the Road Services team, and we also have our flooding email address for our flooding team to look at the more kind of detailed and strategic side of the flooding and look at protecting as much as we can. There's also the Scottish Flood Forum, who Carol Rayburn, who's on tonight, is I'm very appreciative of Carol turning up. Thanks very much, Carol. So Carol looks after the Scottish Flood Forum, who Carol might be able to jump on for a wee quick 5 minutes at the end just to discuss what they look after. There's obviously Scottish Water, like Madeline said about the water board, and Brian mentioned earlier, and then there's SEPA. So there's SEPA on a floodline website to look at all things flooding in the area. Carol, I'm not sure if you're able to just quickly jump on, if that's okay, and discuss the Scottish Flood Forum.
Yeah, sure, not a problem. Evening, everyone. So I'm Carol from the Scottish Flood Forum. Scottish Flood Forum is a charity. We get an element of our funding from the Scottish Government to help support individuals and communities who've experienced or are at risk of flooding. So there's different elements to our services. So if you have experienced flooding before or during a flood, we can help support you with your insurance claims and generally all sorts of advice, and give you directions to what you should be doing and who to contact. Scottish Water's been mentioned quite a bit this evening in the conversation. So a top tip from us would be, when you are contacting Scottish Water, get a reference number when you're making that call, because that way you've got something that can be followed up, and so you won't have to go through the same process and explain it all a great number of times. So that's one first way that you can help get some form of action and follow up to your individual issue. The other thing that we do is that we have resilience managers who conduct property level protection assessments. So in the options that have been provisionally discussed this evening, there's been talk of protection measures that homeowners can install to keep the water out, or as much of the water as possible. So that's a service, a free service that we offer, and we work very closely with the council in trying to make those packages or the recommendations about what is appropriate for each individual house the most appropriate for your home and for you. So there are a number of things that we can do. I know that we're at early stages in the consultation, but we're here to help. So if you've got any queries, you've got the website information there. Give us a call. We're happy to help. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks very much for that. And if there's no further questions or queries, I'll call a halt to the public information event this evening. Thank you all for attending, and we'll work hard alongside our term consultants AECOM to look at the detailed list and the next steps in this process, and hopefully have a further public information event in August, September.
Thank you very much for getting in touch with us all to attend the meeting.
You're welcome. Thanks very much, Madeline.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
See you after.
Cheers.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye. Bye.